If you remember back to the start of this DVD, the fishermen were talking about the importance of a sound industry and making a good living. For a fisherman to be successful and have an ongoing business, he must have future access to fish in a sustainable fishery. The only way to have a sustainable industry is through an understanding of the state of fish stocks, gained through stock assessments.
The most important thing in our fishery is the stock. If we don't have stock, we don't have a fishery. And the most important thing is to make sure that there's stock there for the future. And that's the greatest thing that any of us could do in the fishing industry, is to leave stock there for the future.
My oldest son Ryan runs the Nungurma. He's a dinky dive fisherman, loves fishing, loves catching a fish on a hook. He just loves fish. He wants to keep fishing.
The Australian Fisheries Management Authority, or AFMA, manages all Commonwealth fisheries in line with the Commonwealth Harvest Strategy policy. Harvest strategies provide the tools required to sustainably manage a fish stock to ensure that it is not only available long term, but also provides good economic yield. The primary aim of managers under the harvest strategy is to have healthy fish stocks achieved by controlling the level of fishing mortality. Both stock biomass and fishing mortality are estimated in stock assessments. Before we jump right into harvest strategies, we need to describe a few of their key elements. Firstly, harvest strategies need an indicator, something that you can measure, such as catch rate, biomass, or fishing mortality. Another critical element of a harvest strategy is a goal or target against which its success is measured. This is called a target reference point and is the optimal state of the fishery in terms of economic returns and sustainability. A harvest strategy should also have a defined limit reference point, usually a critical stock biomass below which the stock is at an unacceptable risk of collapsing. Once the limit is breached, targeted fishing is supposed to stop to allow the stock to recover. As their names suggest, the target reference points are places where managers want the fishery to be, whereas limit reference points are where they don't want the fishery to be. A harvest strategy will specify what management action is required to move the fishery towards the target reference points. To help explain how the harvest strategy policy works, we're going to use a graph. To start with, let's lay out our graph and put in some components of the policy. Along here is biomass as a percentage of the virgin biomass. Now, we'll overlay some of the reference points and rules that the harvest strategy sets out. The default target reference biomass for most Commonwealth fish stocks is 48% of the virgin biomass, and that's here. Now let's add the limit reference point. It's at 20% of the virgin biomass, here. If the biomass is below 20%, it's unacceptably low and is called overfished. The risk to sustainability is too high to continue targeting that stock. If it's between 20% and 48%, it's not considered overfished, but needs to rebuild to the target. If the stock is in the green and above 48%, there might be the potential to increase fishing. Managers aim to keep the stock at the target reference point level of 48% biomass. So how do they do this? Well, the next component to look at is fishing mortality, and we'll put that along here. The higher it goes, the higher the fishing mortality. The primary tool that managers use to get fish stocks to the 48% target reference point is by controlling the fishing mortality on the stock. This is done by setting total allowable catches or effort levels that control fishing mortality so that the stock moves towards the target biomass. If the biomass is below the limit reference point, the aim is to set the fishing mortality as close to zero as possible to allow the stock to recover, including stopping targeted fishing. If the biomass is between the limit and target reference points, then fishing mortalities are set to increase the biomass to the target. If the biomass is much greater than 48%, fishing mortality can be set higher to reduce the biomass to 48% over time. But a fishing mortality above this line will lead to overfishing and is not sustainable. It's important to note that the target fishing mortality is set to reach the target biomass over many years. It's not set to achieve the target biomass in a single year. There are a couple of other points about harvest strategies that we haven't mentioned. Firstly, why is the default target reference point for biomass set at 48% of virgin biomass? Well, we're glad you asked. The target biomass is the sweet spot where we get the most profit in the long term, otherwise called the maximum economic yield. If the biomass falls below this, it costs you more to catch the fish. If the biomass is higher, then you're not taking enough. Based on analysis of fish stocks from around the world, the point of maximum economic yield usually occurs at 48% of virgin biomass. This is the default target biomass for Australia's Commonwealth fisheries. For some fish stocks, however, there's information that indicates the maximum economic yield occurs at other biomass levels. For example, tiger flathead has a maximum economic yield that occurs at 42% of virgin biomass. The second point to cover is how the harvest strategy is used to set a total allowable catch, or TAC. When the model calculates the target fishing mortality required under the harvest strategy, it can be easily converted into a recommended biological catch, or RBC. This is the total catch from all sources that can be taken from the fish stock in the following year to achieve the required fishing mortality. But the TAC may not be equal to the recommended biological catch if there are catches from outside the fishery. For example, by recreational fisheries or fisheries from other jurisdictions. Let's use a real example and demonstrate how this works for tiger flathead in 2010. From the recommended biological catch of tiger flathead, scientists take away the expected catch from state fisheries and discards from Commonwealth fisheries. What's left is the Commonwealth fisheries TAC for tiger flathead. This ensures that all sources of catches are taken into consideration before setting the TAC, ensuring that the total fishing mortality is not exceeded. The whole stock assessment process is great for fish species we know a lot about, but for species where there is limited information, then the harvest strategy sets out a different set of rules for the management of these species, and that's a whole different story. So far, we've described fish stocks that have a lot of information. These assessments are pretty much as good as it gets. For species with less information, assessments are simpler and harvest strategies should be more precautionary. If, for instance, we only have catch and effort data, then our assessment might only analyse catch rates, and a harvest strategy might simply be to maintain catches and catch rates at historically sustainable levels.
Often the stock assessments have different levels of certainty associated with them. Some stock assessments you're very certain about the data inputs and the outputs you get from those assessments. There's other assessments though where you're less certain about the quality of the information going in and how uncertain that information is. This puts us to the point where we need to make judgments about how to treat the stock that incorporate this level of uncertainty. Often, when you're more certain about an assessment, you can approach the fishery in a more robust manner and be certain that your management responses are in line with how that stock is. When you're less certain about the stock assessment and the stock status, often you want to be a bit more precautionary in how you handle the assessment results and put that into a management framework. So you tend to adopt what's called a precautionary approach where you have less certainty about the stock status.
I'd like to take every scientist that's on the rags out fishing and show them what's going on, but they haven't got time to do that. They've only got figures to go on. They've only got what comes out of logbooks to go on, and they've only got assumptions to go on. So if we can help them out somewhere along the line with the right assumptions, the right figures, well, it might hurt us this year and it might hurt us next year, but the year after I reckon I can guarantee that it'll be in our favour.
So that's pretty much it for the whole series. If you're still watching this DVD, then it means you've got all the way to the end and hopefully stayed awake. If there's one message to take away from this DVD, it should be, don't take a chainsaw to a fish. No, seriously, the key take-home message is that the stock assessment and harvest strategy process is critical to establishing sustainable fisheries and the long-term viability of fishing businesses. To do the job properly, scientists need the help and support of fishermen in carrying observers, recording accurate data, and most importantly, in participating and bringing your special understanding of fisheries into the stock assessment process. Thanks for taking the time to watch this series. Hopefully, now that you understand the basics of stock assessments and harvest strategies, leaving your boat and joining into this process won't seem so daunting.